Well, you're going to be liking today's program a lot because I'm speaking with Tim Lee, who is a naturalist with the Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Department in the upstate, and we're going to talk about lichens and mosses. They seem so similar sometimes, but they are similar some, but they're also pretty different. And you came and spent the night in Sumter last night so we could get started early. And you took a walk down the street. You could have gotten almost everything you needed just wandering around downtown.
Right, almost everything that you see on the table right now, there were examples of right on Main Street. There were, which we'll talk about this in a bit, but there were lichens that are called Crustos lichens, which are literally crusty, if you would, and they were growing on the barks of the trees. We had some foliose lichens, the big bushy ones, if you would. Mosses growing in between the bricks on the sidewalk and growing on the sides of some of the old structures. But interestingly enough, even some of the new buildings, structures had mosses growing on them as well.
It's crazy. Yeah. And one thing that I really love about this is that they are such diversity in where we find them. And some of them, I mean, like I think of mosses as being in real, on the north sides of trees, right, and things like that. But some of the lichens and mosses grow in the same areas, and some grow in very diverse areas. Often you find them together, though.
Yeah, absolutely. What we have in front of us right here, on the right, is one that people commonly know as Reindeer Moss. It's actually a lichen, and just beside it is pincushion moss. So this is a moss, and this is a lichen, but they were growing right beside each other on very sandy soil, and just at first glance, you might think they're the same thing, the same sort of organism. One of the great things about both of these is they can grow in very harsh conditions. They're called extremophiles, so like extreme conditions, it can be very dry, in some cases even very warm. And in this case, the lichen, and in this case on this moss, both of these, which is true of all lichens and mosses, they don't have a root system, which is different from a lot of plants that we think of. When without a root system, you don't need to put your feet down in the soil, so to speak. You're getting your water and your nutrients from the air around you. So in this case, very extreme conditions, very dry, very warm conditions, but you got both a lichen and a moss growing beside each other.
Well, let's start with lichens because so many people call the extension office and they say, lichens are killing my plants. And what we generally say, our statement is, well, lichens are completely self-sufficient. They don't take any nutrients from your plants. They just want a way to be in the atmosphere, to get up in the sunlight. And occasionally, they'll grow on plants that aren't growing very quickly if a plant is slowed down a lot. But also, sometimes some plants just have a great surface for lichens to grow on. So how does a lichen make its business?
Well, lichens are really like an ecosystem. It's everything kind of all packaged in there together. So you have a mycobiont, which means it's a fungus, and you have a photobiont, so it's the one that photosynthesizes. And that could be either an algae or an alga. It could be a cyanobacteria, which is a blue-green alga, if you would. And that's the one that actually makes the food, if you will. And then it provides the food. The lichen, or the fungal component, actually provides the structure. Okay? Now, both of those, both the algal and the fungus, and in some cases the cyanobacteria, they could live on their own, but there are places that they can live that they would not be able to by living together and playing different roles. So in other words, the algae in here would not be able to survive in those dry conditions without that fungus helping to capture that moisture to help keep it wet.
Okay. And then the moss, although it looks like this is a great big thing that's all one plant, it doesn't have a vascular system. It doesn't have any roots.
No.
And so it has to, these are really tiny little things, and they have to move nutrients and water just by almost osmosis.
Right, exactly.
As if we were kind of holding hands.
Yes.
And I was, this part of my hand was, and I'm passing nutrients and water on to the next door neighbor.
To the next door neighbor, exactly. This is hundreds of individual plants inside of here. So if you want to think of this going into a small scale like a little forest, but hundreds of individual moss plants that look like little trees. That particular growth form is called an acrocarp, and those are the ones that sort of stand up. And by the fact that they're all grouped close together, the moisture that's available within there allows them to be able to move that water easily across the leaf. It's not really a leaf though, Amanda. It's a leaf-like structure. It's only one cell thick, which is also why it's able to bring that water in versus having to go through multiple layers. It's just keeping that one cell or that one layer of cells with the moisture content and any other nutrients that are coming in via the atmosphere.
Did lichens come first, probably?
That's a good question. Most of the research indicates that mosses have been around for a little over 400 million years. Okay. Now, if you go back and you take the algal component, the photobiont, algae's been around much longer. So if you take one component of that, yes, the algal has been around way longer than the moss has. Of course, the moss is a true plant, even though it doesn't have a vascular system, so we'd call it a non-vascular plant, whereas the lichen itself, we group them or classify them as fungi. But there are many, many different things all in that component, that one unit. It's like a whole ecosystem in there.
And then they have different ways of reproducing.
Yes.
Completely.
The moss is going to produce a spore. And when that spore comes out of a little capsule, and you can see some of the capsules right over there. Yeah, there you go. Little round structures like little balls. Those little capsules contain the spores. The
male and female gametes.
Everything's all packaged together, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Think of it almost like a seed.
Oh.
Okay, not exactly, but almost like a seed. That's going to go out, it's going to land, and when it lands, it's not going to grow into something that looks like a moss. Yeah. It's going to look more like an algal mat, a green algal mat. Within there is when your actual gametes are going to form. So we call it the gametophyte.
Okay.
The phyte is plant, gamete, the plant that has the gametes.
It's kind of complicated.
It's kind of complicated.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's 2 steps to get to that.
But the one thing is that they must have water to move those gametes so that they can get together, I believe.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of like sperm.
Yeah, exactly. Mosses are sometimes known as the amphibians of the plant world. While they can live on land, they have to have that water for sexual reproduction to take place. Okay. Lichens a little different. Within lichens, you have reproduction taking place both asexually, which means a piece of this could break off, and if it has all the components, the mycobiont, the photobiont, then you can have a whole new plant growing.
I think you found this that had broken off a rock, and it was on the ground, and so here we have, it's okay now. It's a whole nother lichen.
Yeah, and it's now in a whole different location. Yeah, exactly.
Down here in Sumter.
Down here in Sumter, yeah. And what you see on the lichen, the reproductive component you see most easily is going to be that, like on this plant right here, you can see there's a little cup, if you would, right there.
I sure can.
That's the reproductive structure of the fungus itself. And that's going to contain, sometimes, but not always, kind of like a spore but it's got everything all together. And by that I mean it has the genetic material to grow the fungus, the algal, and in some cases they even have yeast growing within them as well. So that lands in the right conditions.
Bingo.
Bingo. You got a new plant.
And it's just stunning that they've come together. They benefit each other. The alga certainly couldn't live without this under some of the harsh conditions that it does. I mean, they grow on tombstones.
That's right, they do. They grow on tombstones.
Yeah. But they also grow on trees and limbs and rocks and just an incredible variety of places.
Anywhere you look almost, you can find a lichen growing. There's some data out there that indicates that as much as 7% of the Earth's surface is covered with lichens.
Whew,
so they're growing everywhere almost.
And then they are indicators, really, of often clean air. So explain that to us.
As we were talking about earlier with the moss and the lichen, A lot of their moisture, a lot of their water content, as well as a lot of the nutrients are coming in from the air surrounding them.
They don't have any roots.
They don't have any roots. So whatever else might be in that air or that water can also be taken up by the plant. So the overall health of that plant, in the case of the moss, or the overall health of the lichen, can be indicative of what's happening in the air around them. Now, that's not true of all lichens. And there are some lichens that will, as I mentioned, they're extremophiles. So they will grow in conditions where the air quality is very low. While there are other species, similar to this one right here, which looks kind of dried up right now because it's been in an envelope since the 1980s. So the photobiont in there is no longer viable.
So herbarium specimen.
Herbarium specimen, exactly. The common name for this is lung lichen. And it's very sensitive to changes in the air quality.
When I was with you taking a course recently, I believe we were in, was it Sassafras Mountain?
We were at the base of Sassafras Mountain, yes.
Yeah, and went down to a place, I mean, it just, you could just feel like it was healthy. Yeah. And I believe we saw that there. There was high moisture, but also you said that the air quality there is just fabulous.
Exactly. And of course, at that point, being Sassafras Mountain, we were right along the edge of the Blue Ridge Escarpment. And all of that warm moisture coming in from the Gulf hits those mountains, rises and cools, resulting in over 80 inches, in some places 100 inches of rain. So we were in a temperate rainforest that day.
Well, why don't we go through, you've brought such a wonderful collection, and talk about some of the different mosses and lichens that you brought.
Sure, absolutely. One of the ones I want to start out with is this one over here. This came off the streets of Sumter, South Carolina. Very small, but it's one of the ones that is very closely related to this particular one. It's one of the pincushion, because they typically grow in a round pattern, and they're puffed up like a pincushion.
So this is a moss?
This is a moss,
okay.
And this is a moss, both pincushion mosses. They, once again, are a collection of hundreds of individual mosses all growing together, kind of like in that little moss forest, if you would.
Yeah.
So really interesting in there. Another moss that we have, it's growing very, very close to the bark. It's growing in a lateral, horizontal fashion as it grows out. And if you compare it to this one, you can see how it's growing in a long line. It branches many, many times. So sometimes it's referred to as carpet moss because it lays flat.
Yes.
Another common name for it is the fern moss, because of all the branching. Of course, the ferns
ferns are so ferny.
Yeah, so ferny. There, very, very feathery. So the fern moss or the carpet mosses are sometimes referred to as.
Now, does this have a lichen growing with it?
It does. Side by side, exactly. And there actually is a lichen here that actually contains a green alga, but there's a blue-green photobiont over here. So the blue-greens are going to give you that dark-colored lichen, if you would. Okay.
There's another moss you bought that people have heard of a lot and perhaps even used, but not in this form.
Right. I mentioned to you earlier there were different forms of mosses. We talked about the one that was standing tall, the one that laid kind of flat down. This is another group of them. They're known as the sphagnum mosses. And sphagnum mosses look to me like an upside down string mop. Or if you know the book, The Lorax, like a truffula tree, if you would. And one of the reasons that this plant has been used historically in gardening is that up to 90% of the cells in this organism are dead. They just hold water. So if you would, the majority of this is water, and you can see it just dripping out below my hand on here.
So people like to use that to enrich their soils, and if we walk to Swan Lake, and there are certain places on the far across the street, not in the main part of the garden, where you can actually see that growing down near the cypress swamp.
Yes, it grows in wetland areas. It will not survive in dry conditions. Some mosses will do well in drier conditions, but others have to almost stay saturated in order to be able to survive.
Well, let's move on to the lichens, because I don't think that's often the case with them.
No, lichens can dry out almost completely And in that case, what you'll see is you'll see a very light grayish color like this, light green. And then when it gets wet, it'll darken up because that protective layer on the outside of this particular plant or particular lichen, that outside layer is protecting that photobiont in there. And this one is known as Usnia. And a lot of people see this, and particularly if you're on the coast or come to the mountains, you think it's Spanish moss. But it's not. Interestingly enough, Spanish moss is named after this.
Yes.
The species is Ooznoides.
Looks like Usnia.
Looks like Usnia, exactly. But this is Usnia, and a lot of times people will see this growing on their trees high up. The fruticose lichens, the highly branched ones, have the ability to capture more moisture. So they're going to grow higher in your trees. And this is the one that a lot of people see growing is this Usnia, or they will see some of the other fruticose lichens high up in their trees, and they think there's something wrong, as we talked about earlier. And there's one more thing I'd like to tell you about the reindeer lichen. Some people call it reindeer moss. We don't have reindeer or caribou in our area, but in the areas where there are caribou, up to 90% of their diet is this particular lichen. So without that lichen, the caribou would not be able to continue to exist. So very important.
And I've heard that there's some concern that since they have to get everything from the atmosphere, that sometimes this has a good bit of radioactive material in it, and they kind of are studying that to see if it's having an effect on those mammals that use that as their diet.
Exactly. Black-tailed deer, which we don't have either, as well as caribou, they're looking to see what the radioactivity levels are within their bodies. So.
Well, this is the kind of thing I love to go out in my yard and find. I just think that's just the most beautiful thing in the world.
Yeah, and this was one laying on the ground. You're going to see these high in the trees once again because of that high branching of the fruticose that you have. And I mentioned about the reindeer lichen, but if we move across the table all the way over to there, that little clump that's sitting right there, can you point to that to me, Amanda? Come back a little bit, right there you go, right there.
Oh, here?
Yeah, if you look closely at that, you'll notice there's a little depression in the middle there.
Well, there certainly is, and it's soft inside.
Yeah, and a little feather. It looks like a lichen or a moss sitting there. It's actually a ruby-throated hummingbird nest. And what the hummingbird will do is gather lichens and put them all on the outside of the nest to camouflage it, so when a predator sees it, they think it's just lichen on the tree. Yeah,
because not many things like to eat lichen.
That's correct. So they're not only a food source in this case, but also play an important role in helping to hide those little birds as they're developing.
I love textured tree bark, but I also like some of the trees that have real smooth barks, because they'll just be home to all kinds of lichens, and I think that's what we have here.
This is exactly what you have there. That's American beech, a little small branch off of that. We had to do some pruning on that. There are 7 to 9, depending on who you ask, 7 to 9 different types of Crustos lichen growing there together. Now they'll grow together, but they'll bump right up to each other, and they'll kind of put this little line, and they won't let the other one grow within there. And one more thing I'd like to mention about that is these little black squiggly lines in here. They almost look like someone had done some writing. That's how we know which genus is this. This is Graphis. And there are many different species of Graphis, but they all have the same thing in common, that the reproductive structures are lined up and they turn and twist like letters.
It is fun to scratch the surface.
Yes.
And if people want to do more than that, there are resources you can look at, and just go out and start taking walks. Yes. And look at what you see on your walks and on your trees, and don't be alarmed when you see these things. Yeah. And then also the Master Naturalist course is one that you would reach out to Clemson Extension to find out about, and there are often programs through that. Yes. That's how I got to take this. And then some of our state parks have interpretive rangers like you, and so you don't have to travel around the world. I mean, look at this.
Right here.
All right here, and we have some great resources. And I want to thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I appreciate it.